Hello everyone and welcome back to another episode of Brownie's Bytes. Today I wanted to take a look at Sega's portable console, the Sega Game Gear. So the Sega Game Gear was kind of Sega's attempt to fight back against Nintendo's Game Boy. The Game Boy is massively popular, got a ton of fans, had a huge fan base, so Sega wanted to cash in on that portable gamer audience. Now, unfortunately, this was the only console to come out of Sega's portable line. There was the Sega Nomad as well, which was kind of just a Sega Genesis. It was just a portable handheld device that could play Genesis cartridges. This was the only real Sega portable console that would have its own line of its own kind of games. Now, some of the pros for this console were the fact that it was backlit. The whole back screen could light up and you could see it in the dark or wherever you went, and it was also in color. It came out with a pretty decently sized library of games, and a lot of them were pretty good and kind of undermined. Now, a big reason why the Game Boy was so popular was the fact that it was kind of smaller than this thing. The screen for the Game Boy was kind of like that dark green with darker green background, so if you had to compare the screens that way, the Game Gear definitely wins. But the Game Boy was it was just easier to bring around. It had less batteries. The Game Boy only had 4, whereas this thing takes 6, which is kind of annoying to have. Unless you got 6 AA batteries kicking around, you can't really... Well, you can play this thing. It does have an AC adapter as well, if you want to plug it into the wall, but that kind of takes out the portability of it. The Game Boy only took 4 batteries, and I think the battery life on that, even with the smaller amount of batteries, still lasted longer than this thing did. Now, the Game Boy also had games like Pokemon. It had its own Super Mario games. It had a lot of exclusives for the Game Boy Color. There weren't really ports. There were a few ports, I think, but the Game Boy and the Game Boy Color had a lot of its own library. You could only play those games with that console. Whereas this thing, it had a lot of ports. If you had games like Mortal Kombat or even like games like Echo the Dolphin here, they were kind of just straight up ports from their Genesis counterparts, which was a bit of a shame. A lot of people were kind of thinking, well, if I have a Genesis with all these games on it, why do I need to pick up this thing just to play them on the go? It doesn't really make sense. So I think based on the fact that this console was kind of bigger and bulkier to carry around, it had 6 batteries as opposed to the 4, had a lot of ports, and it was like twice as expensive, it kind of flopped and didn't really last that long as a competitor to the Game Boy, unfortunately. Now, because this is a Sega console, there's a ton of Sonic games on it, and they're all mostly pretty good. Like I said earlier, some of these are just straight up ports, but they're kind of have their own little spin to them, some of them been altered slightly, probably so that they're smaller and could fit on these consoles, but they're kind of their own experience in saying that as well. The port for Sonic 1 is really, really good for this console, actually. It's pretty easy. You can kind of just sit down and play it. It's not too hard to figure out how to beat the enemies or the bosses and things like that, and getting through the levels isn't too bad. And the music is fantastic. It's really, really catchy, a little good, like 8-bitty kind of music. It's fantastic, and I would really recommend picking up the first Sonic the Hedgehog game if you do want to pick up one of these consoles. Sonic 2, this was the game that came packaged with the Game Gear back in the day, and this game was extremely difficult, actually. Compared to the first one, I'm not sure why that one didn't come packaged with it, instead they chose this one. But this game was really, really hard. The bosses were very unpredictable, it was hard to read their patterns, and getting through some of the levels was just really tricky and difficult. If you take the time to really memorize everything, you can get through it, and it is possible, but way more difficult than the first one for whatever reason. Now, it did have its own exclusives too, the Game Gear, and it had a bunch of Sonic exclusives. One of them being Sonic Triple Trouble. This game is kind of, I think it's more directed towards the cartoon. The visuals are a little bit more cartoony, a little bit more wacky looking, I think it has like a slower frame rate actually, which is kind of a negative towards it, but it is decent SEGA. It is a decent Sonic game though. If you want like some Sonic fun and you haven't tried this one out before, it's not bad. I wouldn't say it's the worst Sonic game in the world. It's pretty fun. One of the better Sonic games for this console, for sure, I think is Sonic Chaos. This is another standalone only Sonic game that you can only play on this console. And it's really, really good. The visuals are awesome, the gameplay is really, really fun, the music's really good. You can play Sonic and Tails, which is a cool feature. Yeah, I would just highly recommend picking up this one. I'm really impressed with the visuals of all these games. It just kind of looks like a Super Nintendo or a Genesis that's portable. Maybe not quite up to that caliber, but looks like really, really good Master System. And to me personally, I think the Master System looked better than the Nintendo back in the day. And I think that works with the handhelds too. I think the Game Gear looks way better than the Game Boy does. Another exclusive to the Game Gear that's kind of related to the Sonic universe is Tails Adventure. This is kind of a sort of like a Metroidvania kind of style gameplay where you play as Tails. And it's kind of Tails' only like exclusive game where you just play as Tails, and I find it kind of interesting that it's only on the Game Gear. It's a really, really fun game. It has really cool music, really good, interesting controls, fun little story, nice visuals. It's a fun game. If you can find this one, I would say this is definitely one of the more sought after games for the Game Gear, one of the more expensive ones. But another really good reason to collect for this console is the games aren't that expensive. Like, this is the most I paid, and I paid $30 for it. Really not bad at all. And another thing that's nice too is that the Game Gear isn't region locked, so this is actually the Japanese version of this game. You can tell from the different artwork on the cover. So that makes it a little bit cheaper. I think the North American version is $40, where I paid $30 for this one. And it's all in English text too, so there's really no fault at all for picking up a Japanese version. It works perfectly on the console, and it's all in English, so why not, right? One of the other more sought after games for the Game Gear is, I think it's Shinobi 3, I think that's what it is. This is the Japanese version as well that I picked up. I picked this up for $20. I think normally it's about $30 to $40 to get the North American version. And it's its own Shinobi standalone game too. This story is only on this console, on this game. It's really good. You play as like 4 different colored Shinobis, and through each level you have to go through and like save a different one. It's a really fun platformer, really cool. I love the visuals and the gameplay. It's a side-scrolling kind of beat-em-up game. Really, really, really good. Some of the other games on this console, like Echo the Dolphin, are pretty much just straight-up ports from the Genesis one. Now, I don't own a Genesis, so that's why I picked up this. Thought it'd be kind of fun to try out Echo the Dolphin. I've heard about it and seen it around before a whole bunch, but I never actually owned a copy of it, so I thought, why not? And yeah, this is a straight-up port from that console, and this is kind of the reason why a lot of people didn't want to pick one of these up. So yeah, when I was looking around to try and pick up this console, I noticed a lot of the same flaws with a lot of them. I went to a couple different stores and I looked around online a lot, and I saw that the same things kept happening. A lot of people would say the screen was dying on it, or the sound didn't work anymore. They were missing the packs on the back for the batteries. And that kind of sucked because the console was around $30, $40, $50. And I got really excited. I was like, sweet, I can totally afford that. I can pick up this console and start collecting for a new console. That's awesome. But I was kind of not really 100% on throwing money on a console that might not work. And all the ones I saw in person that I did find at local shops, the buttons were all squishy, and like you could tell it was really used and it looked dirty. I didn't feel comfortable buying a console that looked like that. It was in that kind of shape. But I did come across this website actually called Lucky Games. And I was looking through their consoles because they sell consoles and games and accessories, stuff like that. Went through their consoles and I found that they sold Game Gears. Looking through the details, it said tested, works well, everything you need to play comes with it. Came with the AC adapter as well. So I thought, sure, why not? I'll get it. It was a little bit more expensive. It was around $70 to $80, I think, with taxes and everything. But you know, there was a warranty on it. If I didn't like it or if it didn't work, I could return it. So I felt like the little extra bit of money was worth it. And fortunately, when I got the console, it came with a little receipt that actually had a list of all the things that they like fixed on it. So they kind of like refurbished their consoles as they give them out. it was awesome. Like, the screen was replaced, they put a new screen on it, it looks fantastic. The buttons were all reinforced, so they feel like brand new buttons. The capacitors inside were replaced, so the audio works perfectly. It came with the AC adapter, the battery packs were all good to go. So to me personally, paying that little extra bit of money was totally worth getting this console in the shape that I got it, rather than getting a used, kind of risky looking one. So I'd highly recommend, if you're gonna pick up one of these consoles and you're having trouble, check out Lucky Games. If it looks like something that you'd be interested in, check it out. I'd highly recommend it. I bought it through them and I am very satisfied for sure. Now I kind of wanted to just talk about a couple other Sega consoles. I think it's kind of funny, every Sega console that I do have are a console that flopped from Sega. Now, like, I don't have Genesis, but I did end up picking up a Sega Saturn, which came out like in the mid-90s, and it was kind of Sega's console that they put out when like the PS1 and the 64 were out. Really, really good console, and if you pick up one of these cartridges in the back here, you can play a lot of really cool games on this thing. I'm gonna save all that for another video, but this is a really good console for sure. And over the years I picked up one of these, Sega Dreamcast. Phenomenal console, so good. It came out right before the PS2 and the GameCube came out. Unfortunately, this thing didn't really last too long. It was in progress from like, or in production from about 99 to 2001, I think. But in that short span of time, there were some really, really, really good games for it. And this is one of my favorite consoles for sure. The negative thing with these two consoles though is that they're very expensive to collect for. They're kind of hard to find things for. But there are other ways of getting games to work on these that are way more affordable. And yeah, there's just a lot of fun you can still have on both of these consoles. I'm going to do a separate video on both of them for sure. I just wanted really quickly to just mention them. Now, I don't have a Genesis either, or a Master System, but when I was looking around into maybe possibly getting one, I had like about a list of games that I was gonna pick up for it, but then I kind of found this thing, the Sega Genesis Sonic Ultimate Collection Pack for the PS3. And it basically has every single game that I wanted on the Genesis on it already, and it was way more affordable, so this was the route I took instead. If you want to go out and get a Genesis and you feel like playing games on like that is much more fun, I totally get that and respect that. Just for me personally, I wanted to kind of save some money, need to save some space too. That was an easier alternative. If you want to play Genesis games but you don't really want to pick up the console and get all the games, that's a really, really cool option for it as well. So yeah, I kind of just wanted to bring out this console, talk about it real quick. It's a fun console for sure. Like I said earlier, there are a lot of ports for it, but the exclusive games that you can get for this thing are really awesome, and in general, to collect for this thing doesn't really cost that much money. If you happen to be able to find one in good shape, or if you're really interested, I would highly recommend checking out Lucky Games to pick up one of these things. But yeah, so far my experience with it, I've had it for about a year or so, maybe a year and a half, and I've had a really good time with it. A lot of the games are a lot of fun. A lot of times if I'm going to a shop or if I'm looking around, I'll look through the Game Gear games real quick. If you find one that you've never heard of, they're usually like, I don't know, $5. It's kind of cool, just, yeah, sure, throw that in there too, right? It's a fun console, and I've had a blast with it so far for sure. So yeah guys, I just wanted to really quick talk about this thing, explain my thoughts on it, how you could get one if you wanted one, the games that there are for it, and yeah. Thanks so much guys for checking out my video. Leave a question down below if you have any questions about this console and where you can pick one up or which good games there are for it. I will try and help out as best as I can. Yeah, thanks for watching and I'll see you next time.